Thank you so much. Okay, so welcome to the Destruction of Black Civilization Sunday meeting. We are on page 96 and the chapter 3, Egypt, the Rise and Fall of Black Civilization. Okay, so just to start opening up into the chapter, what are our thoughts on just the introduction, and also in the first page of the introduction we have that map. I put it up. So like as I'm going through this whole, just at least it's the first chapter, it's like really it's a real imagery. It's real imagery that's coming up for me as I'm seeing this information. So like what was the first thoughts that came to you?
Yeah, when I started reading chapter 3, the rise and the fall of the Black civilization, I realized like this is just like one that planted a seed moment where it was like, hey, these are Western ways, and where the Black civilization didn't really understand the Western Asian expressions, so where they just took it, just like, oh, let's just accept these ways, and they didn't fully understand the root behind it, and then it led the Africans to slowly be like falling apart. And one of the ways, like we'll read later on, but one of the things too, when I say like fall apart, is just like this eating away moment where it's like, hey, if we integrate the Westerns in here, or the white Asians over to our land and do some sort of integration method, they thought this will ultimately benefit us. But in reality, this was a way for them to just overtake the entire civilization and just led to the destruction of their Black civilization.
For me, the sections we read so far does a great job of kind of clearing up some of the confusion. At least that's how I understand it. Kind of, there's so much confusion surrounding the rise and fall of Black civilizations that it's very hard to understand exactly what had happened, in Western institutions and the way that they describe it or perceive it, and really understanding, how slow the destruction was, and the fall of these civilizations, and the period of time that it took. After, great periods of time of, fantastic, great civilizations, there was also great periods of time of, very slow decline and weak leaders, as he says in the book. And really the role and kind of the role that integration plays, and you can almost see, and it kind of gives you a clear understanding of like why of today, but kind of repeating those mistakes again today.
Thank you. Yeah, for me, opening in, I really liked how they made a distinguish between what they felt the Egyptians or the Black civilization prior to its destruction felt about kingship and how they saw kingship. Like I would like to read from that opening part actually. Here we go. So they go, during the pre-dynastic period under destruction, there were neither. Sorry, bear with me. During the pre-dynastic period under discussion, there were neither oligarchies nor hierarchies, or as these terms are understood in the West. In fact, the Western concept of kingship was foreign to traditional Africa. What was called king was in Africa, and the same senior elder who had to be elected and presided at the Council of Elders, and then only if he had the honor of belonging to a family whose ancestors had either founded the state or had been the most outstanding in promoting the welfare of the whole people. To such a family, the Africans gave paramount leadership. status as long as descendant candidates qualified for it. Westerners called this the royal family, but again, the royal family concept was unknown to the traditional Africa, where the chief or king was the chief representation of the people before God and man, and at once the personification of the people's dignity and the instrument for carrying out their will. It goes on to even talk about, I believe, the person who, that statement, the person who had contributed the most to social welfare, that completely like reconfigures what we view as my understanding of royal family. I think, of course, we'd say money and lineage is what carries a royal family, or like their connections to land or tie, like the monarchs that we understand today, that still exist in like Russia or the UK over here, the Queen that we have. But this concept really realigns and actually reminds me of my grandmother. My grandmother is a Mandingo tribe, and she also always used to talk about how in like whenever there will be a problem in the town, they'll go to the paramount chief. And then when I read that word paramount chief, I thought that maybe that is the same distinction, but the way that it's trickled down. But it's almost, in this day and age, in the Mandingo tribe, I'd almost say, maybe this is my ignorance, but it relates to like fascism, and it's still very much tribalism, in a sense that the paramount chief is the only one who has like autonomy of like the community and family. And of course, with like the modern day, mentality of patriarchy, I can imagine how corrupt that has now become. But to understand from reading this opening chapter and have that information of that system of paramount chief, I feel like there are some parts of the civilization that have been kept in place, but I'd say bastardized through Western civilization and colonialism and post-colonial after effects. But yeah, so that's one reason why I really enjoyed this chapter, because of that distinction that is now giving us of royal lineage and how that is attained.
Yeah, in Ghana, I often see chiefs. They still, have their place and their roles in society, but I never understood, their significance, or really, the role that they play. I know that these people are honored. You see them walking through. They come to, prestigious events and whatnot. But, given Christianity and the way that the entire country kind of looks, I feel that maybe their role has been diminished, or people don't really respect them like they used to. Um, so this kind of also gives me some kind of clarity on what they're supposed to be, and like the roles that that they have played in the past.
Mm.
My grandma was considered a queen. Um, this goes back to me not asking enough questions. I should probably find out more about that. But I know she's a queen in one of the villages. She has a chair and everything. But then again, I don't really know what that means or really understand, too much about that. Definitely.
One of the things too, that when I was reading the beginning, it talked a little bit about how Africans, like the Westerners, didn't understand the like the African way of governing things. And it says that in the book that for Black civilization, they encourage like a self-government, where it's like, oh, their society is like governed by the people. And one of the things that I noticed is, although they have these people in place, like the chiefs, the people who were quote like leaders, they still like wanted input from the like people in society as a whole, if that makes sense. So then one of my questions that I one of the questions I kept thinking about this, like, man, the phrase curiosity kills the cat. I'm not sure if anyone has ever heard of that. So as I was reading this, I almost kept asking myself, like, man, did curiosity kill the cat? You know, like, did the African or Black society or civilization was intrigued, like, oh, what are the Westerners bringing here? Like, what ideologies are they bringing to us? Maybe these could work if we just maybe tiptoe in. But that moment when they decided to tiptoe in was a moment, boom, where the Westerners and Asians got a hold of them.
Hi, Ben. Happy Sunday. So we actually were just sharing our opening thoughts on chapter 3, Egypt, the rise and fall of Black civilization, and we've all just shared. So it's perfect timing for you. You're muted.
Carry on. I'll get in. I'll find my way in there.
Okay,
Warming
perfect.
up. So you said you're starting on chapter 3, right?
That's correct.
Rise and
Page
fall. So
96.
we finished the daughter. Okay.
Yeah.
I got a lot highlighted. So that's page 96 in the book.
That's right. Okay. Where was I? Sorry.
So carry on. I'll catch up eventually. Sorry I was late.
That's okay.
Well, one question I had, because you bring up a good point, Mary, about patriarchy, the modern day idea of patriarchy. So if these, if these chiefs, in the traditional way, they were, the people who are kind of serving as kind of, I guess, for lack of a better word, the representative of these tribes. I wonder if, that patriarchy kind of existed because, they often talk about the matrilineal lineage and the important role that plays in the family or in the family structure. So it kind of, it's like there's, so even though the men are kind of given that power and that position, do they still, kind of have that entire influence over their people? That's something that I often think about when it comes to this. I mean, what do you guys' thoughts on that? If not,
I agree. I agree. In my household, I definitely understood that the importance of a male in the home. Even though there wasn't a male in the home, I understood that that was something that was revered as important. Yet, by actual example, by actual experience, it was female leadership. It was the eldest woman being the matriarch of the whole family, including her sister's kids. Like it's a shared community within the family. It's not a nuclear family sort of thing. Yeah, like you're encouraged to call your cousin sister, but that's all comes from the that mothering nurturing at home. But yet the power dynamics is they do rule, but they submit to that will of a strong man or just a representation of a man in a home.
And even looking as I was reading this chapter, these 2 sections within this chapter, I realized like one of the things that kept standing out is they always talk about the male. It's just like, especially when the integration between the Egyptians and the white Asians, and they came to be like called mulattoes eventually, they only talked about how the men disowned their child, but they never really mentioned what the woman's role was in this, But I know earlier we talked about how most of the women were like from being enslaved at the time. So it was just one of those things. Maybe they didn't even have a place to speak, but I think that's like a continuous cycle of just like men having the floor all the time, having the make the rules. And then even here we talk about the chiefs and each role. Some people say they call like the royal families. It's like the man has that power, and is called the chief. You know, it's called for Western the king, or whatever they want to provide that title with. It's just like that's who was called that. It's not the woman is now nowadays we have the queens, and so it's very interesting. But I think like as I'm reading this that the people who are getting selected as a chief or the king is men, and then women just follow into that role. So it's like the women aren't really selected as to be the woman. I mean, as to be the queen. They just kind of become the queen as default to the man who has been selected. Very interesting.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. Yeah. It kind of, for me, it kind of relates to, I think maybe I had read that further on actually, but it relates to how they had mentioned a female role being revered as, sorry, bear with me. When they do, so yeah, when they did, sorry, when they did revere the female roles and the powers that they did have, like was it Queen Cleopatra? It was through marriage that they were able to take on Egypt. So I do feel like the woman's role or importance in the royal lineage is literally that exchange of marriage, either to like create peace, which we see trickle down throughout history, like maintainingly trickle down throughout history as offering a daughter as a reverence of peace. So as much power as a female royal has, the not just Western civilization, but any dominating force who's trying to take over will lean on using that, making the female like the most vulnerable and most reverent person to actually try and attain. That's my thoughts that come from your expression.
Yeah, because they talked about how the Asians would use the Africans as a way of marrying into royal families. So it seems like an ancient practice that that you offer these women to like you said, marry to mice for as a peace offering. So it seems like in that sense, like the woman's role and her importance, is just reduced to, as a way for these white Asians to come in and marry into power, and therefore to get control of the of these nations.
Mm.
I think another thing too to keep in mind as we continue to read into the blackout and review the section, it kind of talks about how each king represented each Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt had their own kings and their own control over its people. So it's very interesting as we continue to read as some people wanted to promote this. I keep saying integration because it's very crucial in the destruction, of Black civilization, because this integration ultimately was hoped to benefit, but in reality, it was the cause basically of this fall. It's like as soon as you accepted them entirely in, it's like they were able to eat you from the inside out. So one of the things I wanted to mention too, as we're going into like the almost integration part, it talks about how white Egyptians started to take Black achievements and claiming it as their own. And you can still see that till today. It's like this continuous cycle of like this one thing happens back when, which is this book, but then now it's continuing modern day. It's still here to the day where Europeans are still taking non-white people's achievements and claiming it as their own. which is which is why, like, even now today, Black people or non-white people can't, I'm just gonna start talk about Black, but Black people can't, like, kind of rebuild their own society, you know, because it's just like, we live under a system of racism, white supremacy today, where white supremacists own everything. So whether you start a business here, they're still gonna own it, because you still have to go ask the white man to do it. So it's just very interesting how this connection and cycle has started and is continuing to show its face modern day.
Wow, yeah, that makes me just think of the part of the book where he talks about the fact that the white understanding of civilization understood. I think I wrote down the statement. It was a very good observation that I think Vice Chancellor made, where he said the extermination of bear with me. The most commendable attributes of for the white people were careful planning for the future generations and a certain disregard for the living. I'll try and find that page of where he says that, but I thought that was very important that he where he made that statement, because it just showed that they were doing it for the future generations, which is why today those civilization achievements are not being celebrated or acknowledged as Black African contributions to the world. We don't have it recorded. It's been removed from the records because they maintained and continued grafting for their future, not for that day and age. And yeah, it just shows that their formula works, because today in all our academia, no matter what subjects you're starting, they will show its roots in Greek. Their records show its Greek origin. It's backed up by the Greeks. No matter how white supremacy, I'd say, in this day and age, still reverence themselves or the Aryan race as the top. They will take that L of reducing that supremacy and giving Greeks, who they even consider melanated or some form of cultural other to a certain extent, and give them the title of they passed down the civilization to us, not the Africans. Like, so that just shows that it's meticulous to that point it's meticulous to that point of seriousness, just how seriously they take it. And it just got me thinking, and I thought it was a good observation, because it just also would give you the logic behind and lack of compassion that they can have towards other cultural others, like the Irish, the Jewish, and not even to mention biracial, like eugenics being an important part of the advancement of their civilization. Like, them seeing it as in future decades, it will cleanse, or it will be a betterment for them, so they can afford to kill the Jewish people, afford to kill Irish people, and anybody who they consider non-white at that given time.
Wow, that broke it down perfectly. I actually highlight that area that you were looking for. It says, but time was on the side of the whites, whose commendable attributes are tactful persistence when overt aggressive actions is for the moment inexpedient, and their careful planning for their future generations with what appears to be more interest in the future welfare of their descendants than they are in the living. In Lower Egypt, they could bide their time and overcome the triumphant Blacks in many ways. Asian kings in Lower Egypt, now dethroned, still had a direct power over the Blacks through the new brotherhood of integration.
That's it.
When you read that part, one of the things I wrote down on the side is like this opportunity for the whites to have time to plan, you know, and I think that was a very important part for them, is like having a space of planning to like, oh, how to defeat this civilization, how to make this civilization our own and control it. I think that is very important, because it's like, although we're saying like, oh, we're thinking about the future welfare of the people or the citizens here, it's just thinking like, so this plan was created for generations, you know, like, I don't want the power to end, or I don't want what we have going on, our buildings, to stop. So we're all going to think future, but instead the whites were thinking future of how to destruct, and the Africans were thinking future of how to continue their civilization. So eventually it's going to keep going, clashing, keep providing conflict, because one is like, we want what you have, and the other one is like, but we're just trying to build for our next generation.
I think it goes back. It goes to kind of like, what do they want? You know, Neely Fuller. What do they want? The blacks, you know, like Nanaya said, it seems like it's, at least to me, it seems like they wanted peace. You know, they wanted peace. They wanted to build their civilizations up. They wanted to thrive and live. But for the whites and the invaders, you know, they were just waiting for power. Their ultimate goal is to have power and control over these nations, over these systems. Um, uh, what you were kind of mentioning on, I wanted to kind of talk about the Egyptian kind of, and how that has been used to kind of, you know, confuse and kind of destroy the legacy of Black Africans. It seems like the term Egyptian is now, you know, close to modern day like American. Like, there's so many achievements done by Black people that, you know, fall under that guise of American. There's so many, just like there's so many achievements done by, like he says, where is it? Because I just had it. Sorry, but yeah, how the Egyptians, you know, how all these great things were done, but, you know, because I think it's right here on 98, holding the seacoast and thus blocking African contact with the rest of the world. These white Egyptians were able to perpetuate the myths so successfully that even today, many remarkable achievements by Blacks elsewhere over the continent are attributed to Egyptian influence. There's something amusing here too, for when they refer to Egyptian influence on African institutions, they're in fact pointing out Black influence on Black institutions throughout Africa. So it's like Egypt, because they even later in the chapter that he talks about how Afro-Asians, you know, how that term Egyptian became specific to the Afro-Asians, so the I guess the mulatto race, and they hated Black people, but they, you know, they took all the accomplishments and said that they were their own, and that has, you know, contributed to I think the greatest confusion, because there's so much we talk about the ancient Egyptians so much, and I think we don't even understand that, you know, that those people weren't even considered, I guess wouldn't even have considered themselves to be African.
And I think that ties into how he painted a vivid picture of the original system of government and how it thrived. And because they had an existing system of government that was cooperative and based on nature, they were able, when they kept that system of government together, they were able to thrive. And even with the attacks from Asia, with the strong invasions from Asia with strong leaders, it says where it's on 100, it's, you know, for 750 years, well, actually they were able to, it says at the end, they were able to reestablish Ethiopian power as a united empire and held it without a serious challenge for almost 1,000 years. So it's an interesting contrast when later they developed strong loyalty to their own groups after if you can just imagine 1,000 years of peace and control, that groups became less loyal to the entire empire and more loyal to their own groups. And that was how they got weakened. And where does it say? Where when some of those leaders adopted, I don't know where it is, I highlighted it somewhere, when they adopted the Asians' way of ruling, they often found themselves, here it is, Africans generally accepted, I went back to 98, generally accepting Western and Asian expressions without accepting their underlying ideas. Hence, an African king who attempted to be an absolute monarch or Oriental dictator generally found himself in trouble rather quickly, because it just did not work. It did that you know, it's so amazing to see the parallel from then and now, how we're witnessing before our very eyes how competition doesn't work, cooperation works. A system of cooperation is the only way, you know, and the system of competition is really destructive. It makes you, you know, we're all raised in competition with each other. The sports in school, the, you know, getting grades, competing, which makes you my enemy. We're all enemies. You know what I mean? And then it goes on, you know, it's beautiful. This is beautifully written, because he goes on to explain how it is love. He brings up this, you know, the fact that the love for each other. Where? Interesting hostility. Well, the love for each other is what is basically at the root, at the foundation of what is going to bring us back together. And it brings me right to the hoods, where we're killing each other in the hoods, and how that's what's going to bring us together. It's love for each other and conquering that self-hate, and coming together is the only way to overcome this white supremacist system. And we, you know, we really are in a position to thrive if we can come together, because, you know, they got everybody else divided, even themselves. That's why I'm hoping, like, Trump continues to run, because they'll keep them divided. Let us get together.
That part in particular reminds me of, like, a great example, because this is something that continuously is happening, and I think this happened a lot during that, like, the decolonization period of Africa. Specifically, I can speak on Nigeria. I watched a documentary about their civil war that they had there. It was called the Biafran War, and basically, after colonization, when they were leaving, there was 3 tribes: the Yoruba, the Igbo, and the Hausa people, Hausa Fulani. And the Hausa Fulani make up the northern area, the northern region, which is the most populous region. And then the Igbo, and you have the Yoruba, and the east and west. I can't really remember who goes where. But when Britain was ending their colonial rule, the Hausa people, you know, they requested that they keep their political structures in place. So the political structure that Europe brought, they requested that stay there. And ultimately, in my opinion, that's what led to that. That was always set up to fail, because now you're setting it up towards kind of this king or this monarch, this one representative over these people. And evidently, like it says at the end there, they found themselves in trouble rather quickly, and the civil war ended up erupting, because now you have three parties, right? Which basically now we have the people voting for their own, that tribalism, voting for their own parties, but you have the greatest majority of the group living in the northern, so they're going to win every time. That is how that structure is set up to win. Set up in place to win. The people with the largest majority will win every time. So now you have one person with conflicting views, conflicting lifestyles, deciding on what's best for an entire nation of people. So ultimately, that led to a civil war in that country, and so I think that statement is rather true, and it's a fact. I instantly hearing that, knew that was already going to be an issue, rather than, because in the beginning they talk about how they were set up before colonialism came, and they had the chiefdoms, they had the chiefs, they had the representatives, a council, and electing to keep that kind of political structure in place, is, it spells doom for any African involved, for any African tribe or anything involved. I think that every time we come to the conclusion where we try to unite under one monarch or one king, we keep running into the same issues, and we as a people have not learned from that. Even today in Africa, they still go on and the leaders need to do stuff. The leaders need to do this. What about the people? We need more servants of the people. I keep on going back to Miseducation of the Negro, because that's my biggest takeaway from that book was, we don't need leaders, we need more servants of the people.
Yeah.
Well put.
That was great. I've seen somewhere, I think it was a tarot card, and the terminology underneath that was written was servant leader, and I really understood what that meant. It's like, with leadership skills, you can be of service, and it's understanding that my understanding of it is, you're understanding that it's like each one teach one. So in any leadership environment, especially with let's say you're in an environment where somebody doesn't know the information, you give them the tools so they too can turn around and do the same, and then you just find you have now like an army of people who didn't know one thing, and now they know that every day they know the same thing. They have the tools and formula of how to achieve it and get it, and then that's how you get a community moving and working with a unified mind. That's how we can start moving and being on code, as opposed to always seeking the answers from one person, teaching them the tools to be able to get the answer. That's a message that I feel like every colonial country should take on board, because especially being first generation and having a family that lived back there, it's almost like you're the white man to them, and they expect you to be their savior because you're in Europe and you're working and you're studying, or you speak English, and that's just enough to assume you've adopted a European lifestyle and mentality, and you're a capitalist going off into the big city. Like all this, it's just all assumed. So one of the biggest messages that I would say I'd want to pass on to somebody who lives in a colonial country versus living in the colonial country, lives in a post-colonial country versus living in a Western society, would definitely be to just teach the tools of breaking free from that mentality of that white savior complex that we had to learn very quickly for our own mental health. But it's still the dream. It's still like that dream that everybody saw, that they wake up to when they actually live in it. They still have that dream, thinking it's in place, like the land of milk and honey, Especially being educated in English, you kind of want to strive. You don't want to strive for anything else. If you're educated in Swahili, you maybe would have more hopes to work in Ethiopia or work with your people. So, but that brings me to everything that's been shared by Ben and Kweku actually, that terminology of unification. On page 101, he breaks it down very well. He says, the glaring weakness in the unification of the Ethiopian Empire was the absence of any national program for the development of a national solidarity and a sense of national community and belonging that aimed at overcoming the greater local or tribal loyalties. To begin with, there was too many tributary
Tributary.
tributary states within the empire. Their very reason, their very reason for being a part of the empire was mainly for tribute. Their regular contributions to the imperial treasury, such states did not, and indeed could not feel themselves to be integral parts of the empire, blinded by the wealth that was pouring into the national treasury. The empire builders were unable to see and understand the requirements of the human heart and the spirit for the formation of attributes of love and devotion towards the national citizenship. We shall be discussing the traditional African constitution later, because every expanding African kingdom and empire already have the guidelines which the leaders thought applied only to small states, or they felt that themselves to be so rich and powerful that the traditional constitutional safeguards could be safely ignored. I could read further, but just in its elaboration, I feel like this like kind of encompasses what Ben was talking about in terms of leading through the heart and having that unification based on working through nature, or having that patronage of understanding that it's a spiritual guidance as opposed to agreed guidance of greed for material, land, the treasury, and I feel like almost it's that drive that we kind of almost encouraged our demise, although we did consistently fight back until the point where you're not in a state where you can thrive anymore or create art or create crafts to trade. It's just consistent picking up of survival. I feel like that's how a lot of our tribal tribes were created in that sense, removing the educational or that community aspects of restoring or holding on to history or creating history or legacies to move forward. Yeah, I'll just round off the point there.
One of the things too that stood out on that same page, right, that sentence right before where you started to read, it says the failures of one's people should serve as a warning of what to avoid and not as a justification for similar failures by another. And I think that's very important, because as we are ultimately talking about this, but also generating ideas of how can we like get ourselves out of this cycle. And I think it's just like being able to analyze this, like, oh, what didn't work, what just didn't work, and then being able to come up with a different plan that ultimately brings us back to how Black civilization or African civilization was before the Asians or Europeans were introduced.
All right.
And then also that section that you read, it where is it that I did? I have towards the bottom of that page, like right where you ended, but a couple of sentences after that, it talked about I wrote like the idea of justice has been going on for so long. Like people were fighting for justice, quote unquote, like before today's day, before modern day, before slavery, like where Africans were enslaved by the Europeans here in the Americas. But it's more of just like this idea of like, hey, I want to be free has been going on for so long. But I think one of the things too is like as soon as Africans like put their guard down, was just like a stronghold, after that was like, hey, they cannot get free. And I think even as we just say like, oh, they had these up periods where it's like Black civilization was like was flourishing, but it was only flourishing under like Western guidelines, our borders. You know what I mean? Like, it's like you couldn't go outside these Western borders because they're still under control. Whether it was your thought, speech, or behavior, you still had some control. And I think that was very important to mention as we continue to read on. Is like, yeah, they are building and they have like, oh, they have the upper and the lower, in the south and the north, but it's like they all eventually start to turn on each other because there's still a Western hold, you know, and they took up some of the Western ideologies, which obviously was to destruct them. So it's just like they started to like destruct themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was fine.
Thank you, Nanea. Yeah. I actually wanted to ask, thank you so much for reading that statement, because I actually had a question based on the failure of one civilization to serve as a lesson for the other races. And I was thinking other races like the Asian and the Middle, even in through their invasion, but now in history, now we're in a place in history where white supremacy is like the most dominating force. So the Asians actually probably experiencing some of the very cool things that they had done onto the Kemetic civilization, or the African civilization that was there prior to the Egyptian, prior to the Egyptian falling. But I would say also, in that understanding, what do you think? What this is an open question. What are the biggest lessons other races have actually feel like they've learned from us and our demise or our disempowerment throughout history?
I just like to read that last sentence. Well, the last, and on that page 101, an almost fierce spirit of brotherhood. This is to address your question. An almost fierce spirit of brotherhood and sisterhood prevailed in all tribal states. The work of expanding the spirit as the nation expanded was rarely undertaken, since there was no such program in the best of times. The every province for itself spirit was chaff before the storms of invasion. You know, wow, it's pretty clear that this reminds me exactly of what's happening in East Oakland. There's no communities, it's neighborhood, it's blocks against each other. You know, it's no community, it's neighborhoods. Simple as that. And that's how they were able, and so that you know, that's the key. And like before Malcolm X, like 2 weeks before Malcolm X was assassinated, I probably mentioned this in one of our other groups or somewhere, I remember saying it, that he was in Kenya meeting with the leader of the African Nationalist Union, not the African Nationalist Union, the Organization of African Unity leader in Kenya. And he came back and got assassinated. And then 2 weeks after he was assassinated, the person that he was meeting with in Kenya was assassinated. That's like under the radar, you know. And that's what he's pointing to here, is the Organization of African Unity, in my mind. So it makes me think about it anyway.
Yeah, Ben definitely brings up a great point. That last part, I think it goes back to, maybe it was something mentioned earlier. I think that the nations have learned, you know, one of the ways that we were, you know, conquered was how separated and divided we were. It was easy to come in and, you know, take over, conquer one state, and, you know, keep doing that. So it's kind of like what Ben's saying, you know, the neighborhoods, the blocks. There's no nationality, no national spirit. It's like when you go to Europe, it's like, oh, I'm French, or I'm British, and then, but it's like we're white though. But when you come to Africa, it's like I'm African, and then it's like reverse. I'm African, and then it starts going, oh, I'm Tanzanian, I'm Ghanaian, or something, or stuff like that. You know, no, it should be kind of like the other way around. We have, like, you know, these places, but we're all African at the end of the day, right? Wherever we are on the continent or on the planet, we are African. But it seems like I think that's where the other nations have learned from us, is to unify under that kind of that, I guess that spirit, that nationality. Like it doesn't really matter. We're like, at the end of the day, like whether you're German, I'm French, we're white. You know, that's all that matters. Genetic annihilation. We got to prevent that. You know, so I think that's where they've learned. I think also they've learned, they've got their code, and a part of their code is not to, you know, befriend people. You know, I can say we're friends, but at the end of the day, we're not. You know, and I think Africans, and maybe our people here, because even then they keep trying to integrate, they keep trying to amalgamate with these groups, even though they've conquered them. But I don't see, you know, Europeans doing that or white people doing that. You know, so I think that's also another area where they've learned from our failures to, you know, kind of prevent, to not follow those kind of those rituals or those habits. I don't know how you say it.
And also the protection of the resources, and focusing on the power around the focus, you know, the value of your resources. It also reminded me of where, like, I'm skipping ahead a little bit to on page 105, where the gold mines were there, and there were the vast stone quarry, copper and tin mining were conducted. From the south came most of the papyrus plants, from which the blacks invented paper and built the first finest boats of the same tough leaves. The south had all the ivory, and at that time was the only source of highly prized ostrich feathers and all of this good stuff, right? And the Egyptian foreign trade depended almost entirely on southern Ethiopia. Added to these economic imperatives, there was an even greater danger felt in the north. This was the control of the Nile, almost all of which, over 3,000 miles, flowed from southern. So how do you have all the power, all the resources, the river working in your favor, and you know, I don't think, I just don't think we've ever, and I think it's because we've always had so much abundance. It reminds me of Tulsa, you know, the Black Wall Street. They didn't protect it. They didn't set up a perimeter. Now maybe they wouldn't have been able to, because they actually dropped bombs on them. You know, that's the first place in the country that's ever been bombed, right? But had we at least had a defense set up, thought about defending what we've established a little bit, at least try. And that's what I think they've learned from us, is to, you know, put military attention to the resources that you want to protect and take, and set that up. That's how the British have been able to, you know, while everybody else was out conquering the world, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the Italians were all out spending their resources. They were building their navy, and because they have the you know, the biggest, baddest navy in the world, then they went out and just swept everybody up. They learned that from the Africans.
Also, one of the things too, to answer your question, was, I'm not sure if I missed some of it because I left for a bit, but what they can learn from us is not to turn on each other, and how to say this, like not to fight with each other because of outside, because of the Western person, you know what I mean? So basically I'm saying, like, even if there's internal conflict between like Black civilization or African people, it should only stay there. They shouldn't turn their brother and sister over to the Europeans because of that conflict. That conflict should be resolved between them, and not just letting, oh, well, I'm mad at this country or this so-and-so people group, so we're not going to help you fight with the Westerns. Let the Westerns take you, you know? And kind of just like this, literally this divide has created like one of the causes for their destruction as a whole, because they realize like, oh shoot, like we need them, we need the other African people to help us, but since we already like have our conflict, we can't ask them for help, or we don't want to help them. So it's like almost they let like their internal conflicts with each other get in between like their fight with outsiders, if you will. And I think that is almost like you should have, like, you know, not like you should have, but it would have been smart to not have those outsiders take you guys one by one because of your internal conflicts. I think like if even though internal conflicts like almost are inevitable, it's like it's okay to have an internal conflict and say, I'm mad at you because of this, but if someone else came over here to confront you, I'm with you still. I'll stand with you, you know, but not to where like, oh, if they're gonna come fight you, then I'm just gonna stay out of it, or help them, you know, provide them intel. And I think it's important, like if you see modern day, some of the societies that are here, like we look at the Asian society, it's like if US makes a move, they're gonna bomb us. You know, they're gonna bomb the US regardless of if it was China or over here or over there. It's like they're all gonna come together at the end of the day, but it's like they still have their internal conflicts with each other. Like they're still mad at each other for whatever reason, you know, darker skin, light skin, the divisions. But it's just like when you go to Africa, they're still in this cycle here where it's like they conflict with each other, but they'll turn them in to the Westerns, you know? And I don't know if it's because they don't have a fighting force, like how I think of like China keeps coming to mind. It's like the US is low-key scared of them, you know? And they call them because they have the big guns. But it's like when you look at Africa, or you think of Africa as a continent, you don't think of like they're going to defeat the Europeans, because I don't even know what their military looks like. If they have a military, I know they have one, but you know what I mean? Like there's never any talk about like their big guns, quote unquote. So it kind of makes me think like this is like set up for a reason, you know. It's like this for a reason. I think like even with the internal conflicts within Africa, like the different countries there, it's like it's gonna break them again. It's gonna break them again.
Thank you so much for that share. That actually, it got me thinking so much about the fact that and now I'm just envisioning any African military, and when was the last time that they were involved in any kind of outside wars, or like any kind of preventing any form of invasion. I think the most like consensus and like visual imagery that I get is literally civil wars and rebellions and like guns being given in, and like civil unrest, just internal conflict and pain. That's what I see. And I know it's not fully orchestrated by like white supremacy has its claws in it somehow, whether it's through manipulation or desperation, whether it's through the drug muling or weaponry, or whether it's through like an agenda. Like there's a reason why that these two particular, like guerrilla warfare or something, like there's a particular reason why between these African countries are warring against each other, and the country in the middle is getting caught in the crossfire. Like things like that is, I believe it's like highly orchestrated. And yeah, we don't have a defense system. I don't, maybe correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know, maybe in times of natural disasters, these are the soldiers that come in and help their community. I don't live there, so I don't know. But the visual imagery and the propaganda that I see and get is civil unrest, which means we're hurting ourselves more than protecting ourselves as a civilization.
Yeah, one of the things to add is like you're talking about like this high orchestration. It's like, yeah, like even the Europeans caught on so long ago, like how beneficial it is to turn each country against each other, or each African tribe against each other, because that's their way of getting in. And I've only been to Ghana so far, and it's just like when I went to Ghana for the first time, I was almost afraid of the police, you know? It's kind of scary. Like I was almost like, this is scary. Like I felt like scared to be there. And I don't know if it's because of like, I know they have like their internal conflicts, but it's like the way the country felt was like scary. And I think like thinking of coming back here to the Americas, it's almost that same feeling with the police here. So it's like seeing those Western views over there, it's like it's very similar, you know. The police are the people who like monitor the land, have been amped up to be like macho and like almost like interrupt the flow of things, you know. I felt like when I was there that they're gonna hassle me, you know, like, oh, if the police like comes to me, they're gonna like try to hassle me and take my money or whatever it is, and that's due to like corruption. But I feel like they learned it from the European, so it's like very interesting because I see it very vividly when you're there. Like, man, the European is so good here that it's like destructing them again. And I wouldn't be surprised if like the whole talk right now is like, oh, we're Europeans are only going after the big guns, which is like, I always say China, but there's other people, obviously, other places where they're probably afraid of. But I know, like, for a fact, if the Europeans stood up today and went to Africa, like, I feel like they could just swipe it all out again. But I don't know because I don't know what their military is like, but it's just like, to me, it's like they're already so into like the European lifestyle, white supremacy, what they've done. So the European lifestyle that they'll probably just give it all up again to the European. But I think it's just like having that strong will.
I'm sorry for like kind of, it wasn't funny, but it brought a thought to mind. When I was in Kenya, I saw the police catch a guy trying to steal a tire. Okay. And this is not funny. Forgive me, Lord, for laughing, but there were about 4 or 5 other police officers, and they were marching this guy down the street. And there was only one of the cops had a gun, right? And he had it in his holster. So he took the inner tube that apparently was in the tire. It was an inner tube. You know, the tires used to have inner tubes. Car tires used to have inner tubes. Some, you know, old school. So this thing was flat. The inner tube was flat. Big fat piece of rubber. Every 3 steps, he was slapping this guy with the inner tube, walking him down the street. So as an American, you see this, you can't believe it. You just, it's but you know, because we're raised to think, you know, that we're civilized and it doesn't happen here, but it happens worse here. To your point, Nania, you know, it's the same kind of thing that's going on here. It's not funny at all, but that imagery just, oh God. And like what you're saying is, as far as like, they could just actually, if they wanted to old school do an invasion on Africa, they could just roll right over them with our military might. But of course, obviously, it would cause great international outcry. So what they do, they are still invading and doing the same things covertly. You know, like for example, I think I gave you the example before about how Museveni was actually behind the Rwandan genocide. He was behind stopping the Rwandan genocide, right? And it was his cousin. You know, the Ankolis and the Tutsis are cousins, kind of like, you know, in the Congo, Uganda, and Congo and Rwanda. So Kagame, who's the current president of Rwanda, was I guess RUF or whatever, the Rwandan Freedom Front, the Rwandan RUF, the Rwandan United Front, I think it was. So Museveni backed him. So now Rwanda's like on the top 5 cleanest cities. Kigali, Rwanda is like the top 5 cleanest cities in the world. They got it together now. Uganda is doing better. They're developing, but guess what? Because in Congo, there's a gold mine right across the border from Kigali, right? And then there's a gold mine right across the border from Uganda. So of course, Museveni went and took that gold mine. That automatically, he's got the baddest army in Central Africa aside from Kenya. So Museveni took that, And Kigali with his rebels, took the gold mine in Congo. Meanwhile, the Congolese army is not in agreement with that. So they're fighting the two factions, right? The Ugandan faction in the east and the Rwandan faction in the west, or the south, whatever direction. And you see the white men, you see the blue United Nations, but they're French. You see the French supplying the guns for the Congolese. So it's the French that are trying to, you know what I mean? And then you have the Canadians that are backing one faction, and you have the Americans back. So these are proxy wars, you know, and so it's the way. So we're fighting. You know, they're using us to kill each other, the same way they do it in the Middle East, and the same way they do it right here in the hood.
Yes, I wanted to comment because on the point that Ben brings up, it's like they're fighting amongst each other, but at the end of the day, you know, the European is going to get those resources. They're fighting for the European to have control over those resources, and, you know, to pay them some money to have control over those resources. So, you know, at the end of the day, that doesn't harm anybody except themselves. Going back to, I don't want to get too far off topic, but, you know, going back to the police thing, I just think in America and, you know, Western civilizations, they're just a lot more sophisticated about how they operate. You know, I think it's very common practice to see what Ben's talking about, like the police doing that kind of stuff to people, you know, like lashing them, whipping them with stuff, especially like thieves and stuff, you know, kind of like parading them around and embarrassing them, letting everyone know that this is a thief, that kind of stuff. I think that's very common practice, which I'm, you know, for the most part, not against. I'd rather that happen than, you know, him being shot dead or, you know, being brutally killed, you know, so a couple like whips with that. Hopefully, you know, didn't rip his skin or break his skin or anything. But
I don't think it did.
Yeah. The military thing as well, I think, you know, those African countries don't have the resources nor the money to, you know, to produce such a military might, you know, where you have Western civilization. I mean, I see American military as, you know, the power behind white supremacy, why white supremacy can keep going on, you know, so with such powerful military might here, who's going to invade Europe when your ally is the US of A? You know, who's going to invade, you know, some of these other countries and whatnot when, you know, you have the US of A. Yeah, so I wanted to bring it back to the Egyptians once again, and kind of the whole. I want to read this on 103, but the whole Egyptian, how over time Egyptians just kind of took over all of Africa, took credit for everything. On page 103, where he talks about how the Afro-Asians, you know, became the Egyptians. He said, third out of this situation developed a passionate and defiant nationalism that restricted the term Egyptian to mulattoes alone. Henceforth, neither Asians or Africans were to be called Egyptians. Indeed, the new breed began to treat Asians as strangers and no longer welcome them en masse, even in Lower Egypt. The Afro-Asians had apparently resolved that since they could not belong to either the black or white race, they would be a race by themselves and in their own right, the Egyptian race. It worked. Asians, if unmixed, were now called Asians, and Africans, if unmixed, were called Africans or Ethiopians. They alone, the new breed, would be called Egyptians, and the writers of the world would follow this classification from Homer's time to this day. I think that's a very, very important statement, because as we continue to read about ancient civilizations in ancient Egypt, I think we need to understand, like, who exactly are they writing about when they mention Egyptian. And then I think this is also kind of like racial classification confusion that Neely Fuller talks about in his book. You know, the Egyptians, you know, and how I don't know, I can't stress enough how important that is, or how confusing that can be. Yeah, sorry to take us off.
That's okay.
I actually wanted to
Oh, sorry.
to add to that. That was a great statement because I actually wanted to mention that as well, especially on 102 where it talks about the new breed. And then this is the first time it said first the Afro-Asians or coloreds. I'm not sure if I'm saying it wrong, but I assume that it said coloreds or coloreds. Had far outnumbered the Asians in the northern population during the past 1500 years. And I think that's very important because that was the first time I heard the word colored come up as being Afro-Asian. So it just like continued to evolve into something else where they called the enslaved or blacks colored people. And then also when you're talking about the Egyptians, and here it talked about Africans plus Asian were now called the Egyptians, or were called the Egyptians, but now they wanted to be called like mulattoes, I believe. Is that what was being said? And then also further down, it talked about how the white Asians wanted to be called like Arabs, because I was always thinking like, what's the difference between like, oh, being called an Arab, like, oh, I'm Arab, and then some people say I'm Egyptian, you know? So it's like, really, who are the Egyptian people? Because I know like some people say like, oh, if you ask an Egyptian nowadays, like, oh, are you black? They'll simply say no. But it almost like thinks of it like, how are you not black? You know, like I don't understand how you're not black. So it's just one of those things that just make clear like Egyptians were evolving, but they started off being Africans plus Asians, white Asians. So it's like they evolved and now you have black ancestry. So it's very interesting.
I have a question. Thank you for that because that raised a good. I have something highlighted here. Um, nowhere did their Asian. This is at the top of 103. Nowhere did their Asian fathers and other white kinsmen regard or accept them as equals. So they're talking about the mulattoes, the coloreds, while the blacks had come to hate. Wait, this is what I don't. Is this a typo? What? Wait, let me go back. First, the Afro-Asians of colors far outnumbered, where you read, the colors became sensitively aware that they were suspended between two worlds, the black and white, and that they were not fully accepted in either. Nowhere did their Asian fathers and other white kins regard or accept them as equals, while the blacks had come to hate them as much as they hated the blacks. What?
I think what they were saying was that initially Vice Chancellor had made a mention of, from my understanding, that when mulattoes were raised, they were especially dependent on how they came to be. If it was like forced breeding for the sake of land domination, then they would be educated that their mothers were whores or would to
Right.
see themselves as less than. So growing up, they would have a natural disdain or hate towards the African side. That was part of the mentality and training. And I'd say also like what coloniality has done, like what we've all been talking about here in terms of how white supremacy is still orchestrated in African countries, free of white people being there, but it's done through the power dynamics of what the education that was left there through capitalism. And like with police officers, you'd often see bribing as well in African countries, and bribing will help get you through a bad situation, or you'd be liable to the natural ways of law in a sense, or whatever the circumstances. The power dynamics are very important there, and like how a thief can be openly ridiculed or made into a joke, like to the point where I've seen it back when I had gone to Sierra Leone. Sorry to go off topic. I just wanted to Yeah, let me just go back onto topic and I'll talk about that later actually. But I'd even seen a kid like poke a guy in inappropriate places because he was like bounded by a tire and being punished for stealing. And when the man was shouting and saying that the little girl is abusing him, they told him to shut up. Like he had no respect. And observing that as a child, I really learned a lot about the world that I literally thought these were open to ridicule. That was my education then, but now I understand that punishment is completely different in a place where power dynamics could be anything. What power dynamics are not well established as they're still developing and still trying to establish their cause as I would even say as a community, as a people, because corruption is like interwoven into the fabric. There's like most of these developing countries are trying to come out of development and into a state of like thriving and actualization. It's going to be hard to get there if the country is still desperate and in survival mode. And if police officers are in survival mode, then of course that psychology of power dynamics, you're gonna get exercise your power anywhere you can. But yeah, so to round off and to come all the way back to the statement that you made about blacks hating themselves and hating the blacks. What colorism has done from what I understand in post-coloniality, mulattoes would often get the jobs that Africans couldn't get in their own countries. In Sierra Leone, a lot of Lebanese merchants who had come and integrated and traded and lived in Sierra Leone once colonial colonial rule was like trying to alleviate. They hired for many of the secretarial jobs or the government jobs were mainly given to mulattoes and that just, I think that's just how colorism like came into give us our own sense of power dynamics to have to deal with before we get to the level of dealing with white supremacy. I'd leave it at that.
And just to add to that too, like when I read that section, Ben, about the blacks like hating blacks, and I kind of thought about it in terms of today's society, how they have been like almost told to hate themselves, you know? So it's one of those things of not wanting to be black or not wanting to be in the society of or in the state of inferiority all the time or being oppressed. So I think one of the things that I always think about is like when as though they're hating the mulattoes, but they're hating mulattoes because it's like, man, you got to have a little European in you, you know, or a little Western or Asian in you, white Asian in you. And I think coming back, it's like blacks didn't get to mix with anything, so nothing made them like above other than their own thoughts, you know. So even then, I just think like going on to page 104 where it talks about like the Ethiopia South, it's like this continuing to unfold of like blacks didn't like themselves so much because they were told to. I'm gonna keep saying that because they were told to do this. They still promoted this integration. You know, it's like I keep saying integration, but that really just stood out to me the entire time I was reading this. It's like here it says they had lost on page 104. It says they had lost faith in the black kings ruling from Memphis, who not only favored integration but promoted it. And that really stood out because it's like not only did they favor integration but promoted it, but I think they wanted this integration because it gave them a sense of hope. Like, oh, if they just integrate with us, then we can maybe move up in society, or maybe this can benefit us in some sort. But in reality, it's like as soon as that integration happened, blacks hated themselves more because now they're being oppressed and now they're being like taken advantage of at this point. And it's not even like an equal benefit. It's like literally a 95% to 5%, you know, like 95% whites are benefiting and then 5% blacks are benefiting. But it can also be questions like, did blacks ever benefit from the integration? So very interesting.
It brings tears to my eyes, sort of, you know. that that it's that the self. I just refuse to wrap my head around it. I'm reading it and I'm understanding it the way you guys are too, but I just refuse to wrap my head around them, because of because of the division and then the infighting, and then the togetherness and the attack of the Asians, and they're taking the copper and the gold and the ivory and the paper and the resources and really improving upon it and utilizing it and building their military and making it appear that what we have is better than what you have, and we're better than you, which is this delusion, because it's based on violence and manipulation and not cooperation and love. And it's just amazing how it brings it right up to today once again. How
I think one of the other things too I would like to mention is that going towards the bottom of 104, I'm not sure like where to start reading, but it kind of talks about how everyone wanted to combine all the lands together, like all the regions, if you will, like all the divisions together. And but the only reason why they wanted to do that is because they wanted someone to rule all of it. They didn't want like, oh, someone rules the upper, someone rules the lower, someone rules the east and the south, the north, west, whatever. It's like, no, let's all combine them and integrate everybody, and so we can have one ruler of all of it. But not just one person, one group of rulers around all of it. And I think that's very important, because one of the other notes I have here is that independence showed to really benefit the African civilization. Like being independent really benefited them. But as soon as like anyone else is involved, it's just, it's gone. And I think it just comes down to like, Ben, where you're saying like it's hard to fathom the idea of like Blacks really hating themselves, but it's also like, the thought when you get bullied for so long. I'm not sure, like if you ever see stories or hear things about like if a person has been bullied for long periods of time, they start to almost hate themselves. Like whether you're being bullied because your eyes are big and it's like, oh man, my eyes are too big, and you start to cover them. You start to do surgery to make them smaller. You start to do all of these gymnastics in your head to fit in to what someone is bullying you about. And I think that kind of goes into, that example goes into how the Blacks were feeling bullied almost to hate themselves. It's like, oh, your skin is so dark, or whatever it is, you're worthless, and all of these things. It's like now they have to like show their worth, but in order to show their worth, they almost have to like become the European, or become the white Asian, or the Egyptian, or whatever. They have to become all of these things in order to find worth in themselves.
Yeah, it's amazing for us to be able to be right now today, going back and experiencing this history, and then seeing the same thing happen. That's what I kind of paused back then, what I was trying to get to. The fact that we were talking about not having the military might, but the paradox is that the plutonium and uranium that they need for their nuclear warheads is in Africa. And the resources that they need for their for the war machine is in Africa. So why don't they place an embargo on the resources that they need to build the military? That kind of thing. Protect our resources.
Yeah.
It's still happening.
Yeah. I actually wanted to read at the very bottom of page 103. Sorry to backtrack, because I do love the points that Nanaya has made moving into Ethiopia's south. But before I get into the
no problem whatsoever.
Before I share that, I just wanted to talk about. I just wanted to read this bit. The 11th dynasty was started with stronger Black rulers, beginning with Enhotep. Was that the sorry?
Mentuhotep.
Amentuhotep, that's not what I wanted to read, sorry. However, the increasing hostility to the Asians was due to their offspring's resentment over being rejected as equals and having a lower status in society whenever white Asians were in control. The hostility to the Africans had been nurtured from birth and remained the same, yet they never failed to seek alliance with the blacks when it suited their purposes, just as they do today through OAU, or to marry into the ruling African families to enhance and perpetuate their rule. The 11th dynasty was started with stronger black rulers, beginning with Emhotep and followed by three kings of the same name. Their rule was again limited to Upper Egypt since the Asians had re-established their rule in the Lower Kingdom during the period of national turmoil and rebellion. Menhotep II, after restoring order in Upper Egypt and promoting a rapid economic program, had turned north to repeat Mena's great fear of conquering Lower Egypt again. I read this because that statement that was made about that we've been talking about in terms of self-hate and hate being perpetuated into their minds, either for the race that was had the power over them and themselves for not being the ones in power or not being associated with that power or beauty or aesthetic, however it's displayed. It just shows how strong it is of the mind in a sense, because if for 1,000 years the black independent states were able to like continuously maintain rulership, or how rulership has come back into power by Menhotep and his sons following their lineage, in that time Asians are still living there, love still happens, people still are still integrating, and life is happening. Over the years of them ruling, it's a quiet time for these mentalities to still be set, to be soaked in place. So when a rebellion does happen, when a coup does happen, when a white ruler takes over one new part of a nation, it's easy to grasp the mentality of the majority of the people now there, because they either play on the hate that they're experiencing in themselves, or they play on the hate that they're experiencing in their own society or in their own community. And we see it happening here today. Like I believe the only reason why Brexit happened in the UK was because the government were able to play on the propaganda of making people think it was going to get immigrants out of the country. So they played on their hate and frustration for the other. And the European use it on themselves. Like they don't just use it on us and their civilization. And this shows me how much they even use it on themselves, and how they can manipulate and control themselves in group masses without actually having to tell the people, look, we want you to hate black people, so in the future, or we want you to hate anybody who's more pigmented than you, because in the future we're going to need you to hate them, or we need to adjust your attitude so you're more susceptible to certain behaviors. That's what I'm seeing laid out here, and that's why it's okay in a sense for like periods of time of black civilization or golden ages to occur for us in a sense, and us to be able to make rapid economic programs, because in the long haul, through, I wouldn't say just integration, but through maintaining this distribution of who gets to be called white, and labeling and maintaining of those labels, that has literally single-mindedly allowed them to control and manipulate our behaviors as a people. And this social identity is so important, and why it's very important for us to go back and fetch this information and know ourselves in this present time, because then it really stops the suggestion and our perspective on what we associate ourselves with in society, like following movements of like Black Lives Matter movement, or not to say we can't relate with transphobic movements and in that kind of sense, or LGBT community, because the thing is we all play off the same pain of the social injustice that we're experiencing. But this information gives us more of a deeper perspective, so we don't socially identify with things that we wouldn't necessarily want to move towards an action, because it's not on code. with regaining our civilization. Very long-winded, but yeah, that's what I got from reading that passage.
Yeah, and a point I just wanted to add too was centuries of this from what you read, centuries of that hate that's been built in, that's been raised upon them. It says their hostility to the Africans had been nurtured from birth and remained the same. And that's just kind of been there for centuries. It's never been addressed. It's never been, steps have never been taken to, solve that, right? And who knows even to this day. So it's very deep rooted. That's the hate for Africans, and even the self-hate. If you hate Africans, as an Afro Asian, you most likely hate yourself, which also leads us all to probably being a huge projection. When you hate yourself, you tend to project it on the others. You projected that hate on the African people. Therefore, that's probably the drive.
And what I noticed that I see echoing sometimes in society is like I feel like, especially with biracial people, when you're socially identifying, you either take on like not even to say the activist mentality, but you just completely disassociate, but you can't literally be in the middle because of that. If you are dealing with any forms of self-hate, you either show allegiance to white supremacists, or you make sure that you're doing what you can to socially just keep that validation of your social identity. So you wouldn't find, I'd say, like, how a black person or a fully African person can be like completely complacent or not even aware that they'll just play the blame game and not even be aware that it's a white supremacy thing, just like just blaming everything, just basically being a victim of or a product of their society. I would say with most people with dual heritages from an early age, social identity is a very key and important part in that validation. So you either the manipulation that was done during the times of Black civilization would have allowed society to gear it towards destruction, towards the African side, and that people pleasing mentality of the white side. And so basically maybe even being worse in terms of like, I get that William Dubois kind of mentality, or the brown paper bag theory, or just basically being a little bit more harsher just to disassociate further, or being on the allegiance of being black and proud to just basically have that, can maintain that social identity for themselves and sanity. Yeah.
And it's definitely compensation. It's my mother asked, well, no, I asked my mother, I take that back, how she felt about me never dating a white girl. Mm. She said, well, that's who you identify with. And if you notice, Malcolm X, Farrakhan, the most militant black militants are lighter than me. We're over identifying, and we're overcompensating because of our whiteness. I know that's true for me. Even my mother's even my white mother was trying to get away from her whiteness. Because I don't know if I've ever mentioned, but she's the youngest of 4 women, and they all had black husbands. And this is in the 40s. Yeah. What was it that I wanted to share about that? I have something highlighted here.
Let's see.
Okay, yeah, I got it. Oh yeah, where I mentioned the OAU and how you mentioned here how the Arabs are taking advantage of the OAU. That part you read, that was interesting.
Sorry, what is OAU?
The Organization of African Unity.
Okay, thanks.
And that's what Malcolm X was trying to Black people, get us to join as Black Americans. And he mentioned here how the Arabs, um, that's how they're using the OAU for their own purposes, for their own benefit.
That's interesting because I recently watched another documentary on Gaddafi, and he originally was trying to kind of do what Kwame Nkrumah was doing, was trying to unite all the African nations into one Africa. Gaddafi was trying to do something similar, but with all the Arab nations, the North African countries and the Arab nations, trying to create a unified Arabic nation. And when he saw that failed, he then kind of started pivoting towards creating that African nation. So I can kind of see the similarities there. It's very interesting.
That's true. When making alliances when it suited him, right?
That's very interesting. I actually didn't have much awareness about the initial, trying to make an allegiance with the Arabs. I only was aware of Gaddafi's trying to unite the whole of Africa through a single currency, and me understanding that is the main reason as to why he had to be taken out. Not even to mention the welfare system that he had managed to put in place in an African country, but of course his Asian and Arabian dominated the country was, but the welfare system was open to everybody who was in Libya, and there were still Black natives there who were experiencing the welfare to the point that the Arab Springs had protested that they didn't want the African natives to be able to get the benefits of welfare. But yeah. So that made me actually look at Gaddafi differently. I thought, oh, he literally was focused on the actual social welfare system and development of Africa. So I actually didn't know about the initial part. So thank you for that.
Too. I think Idi Amin had a lot of influence on him. And Idi Amin was super wealthy. He extracted a lot of gold from Uganda when he exiled in Libya under the protection of Gaddafi. They're Muslims, and like Gaddafi, when I was in Kenya, when I was in Mombasa, someone gave me a book. I don't know how in my right mind I left that book there, but he was the leader of the Muslim world in Africa. He was almost like Muhammad.
He has that. Are you talking about the green book that he wrote? I saw
with
that
all of his photos in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like a Bible. It was like a cult of Gaddafi.
Yeah.
Very,
it's very, very interesting stuff. I agree with a lot of things he was doing, definitely. But reading this kind of makes you think a little bit more. I'm not saying his intentions weren't pure. He had ulterior motives, but I think that we as African people should learn, it kind of examine things through that kind of lens as well. I'm sure, no doubt, if he had succeeded in what he wanted to do, it would have made the world a better place. Could have gone further to establishing justice.
He was a huge threat for sure.
Definitely.
The satellite up there made it possible for Africans not to have to go through the European system for communication. That was Gaddafi that did that.
Wow.
I had a question that sorry, was I interrupting? Okay. I had a question from reading page 104, from the very introduction of Ethiopia South. It's just a very great explanation of how that Asian stronghold that they talk about and the constant invasions really did a lot to damage the economic trades of Egypt, which of course affected highly its long-term strength and empire which can obviously lead to its further demise. And the question that I wanted to ask the group was, in what ways do we see today in our own economic structure, do you see that we've been blocked either by other races, or just like what policies do you feel like are in place that block us as a people from group economical growth?
I've definitely come into I've gained some knowledge about the aid that's constantly being given to Africa, and that being one of the number one reasons why Africa and we as a people aren't allowed to thrive or kind of trade. And like one of the reasons why we don't own any of our resources is people are the I hate using this word, but the leadership in that country, in those countries, are taking this aid rather than using the resources, developing them themselves, and selling them and trading with foreign nations and nations amongst themselves. So I think the aid is definitely, and I would urge all of us and everybody else to become familiar with that, because one thing that we hear is Africa being like a struggling continent, they need aid, blah blah blah, this and that. But really, it's, from my understanding, a ploy, a plan to just keep Africa from trading with other nations and developing their own wealth and controlling their own resources. I hope that answered the question.
Like embargoes, that's one. Embargoes on countries of color. In particular, I always bring up Venezuela, who has the largest oil reserve in the world. Just totally dismantling their ability, just crippling their ability, kneecapping them in a way to produce and to market their reserves, their oil. That's one policy. Those embargoes on different countries that are definitely racist, and the redlining in this country. The real estate redlining. That's really where the power comes from. Real estate. They know that. And there's still covert redlining happening. There's areas in right up here in Northern California where you'd have to jump through extra hoops to get some property in certain areas with homeowners associations. They'll block you.
So just to clarify, redlining is like needing like a lot of different criteria to be able to meet the requirements to buy property.
Yeah. Yeah, they won't loan you. They won't loan, like in its tradition. Historically, after World War II, there was plenty of money and not enough housing. So those projects, those housing projects were built for white people in San Francisco. Those were segregated. The housing projects were segregated. And when the war was over, and they gave contractors huge. This was the invention or the advent of the suburb, where they loaned vast amounts of money to contractors to build these houses, and then loaned money to white people to buy the houses, and black people weren't eligible for those loans. But you were eligible to move into those projects. Kept them relegated into the projects. Then it's there are forms of that is still happening today. They won't loan you, like we used to have black neighborhood corner stores. And you notice now they're all Arab. All Arabs got the corner stores, but it went from the blacks having the corner stores. Maybe they had they're always borrowing or whatever for whatever. And it's an interesting study. I don't know all the details behind it, but the Asians eventually took over. Chinese people took over the corner stores. They were able to get loans and buy, like maybe the store owner got old and their kids didn't take over or whatever, and they would sell the store. And the foreigners were able to get loans. They wouldn't give black people the loans to buy those stores. There would always be extra hurdles in the loan process. Whereas the foreigners come in 5, 6, 10 deep, and they all co-sign for each other and stick together. So it's like a double-edged sword. We're on the one side, they're making it more difficult for us to get the loan, and on the other side, the other people are coming in with a good plan of togetherness, working together. And instead of us getting 10 people to co-sign for each other, we didn't have that kind of. So it gets back to that. It gets right back to that togetherness. And if you what we were talking about before, the hate, the self-hate, how they, it's not just used on us. They manipulate others with the self-hate as much, not as much, but so the key for us, I think the secret ingredient, the key that they got is not so much to promote the self-hate and to promote people dividing each other, which they do expertly, but first to find ways to get us to remove the love for each other and the loyalty to each other and to the group by feeding you little carrots, the dangling carrot in front of they put a ring around the donkey's head and have a stick and a carrot hanging in front of it. Some individual goals. Museveni has billions of dollars, so it's individual. You can have, just like when Jesus was up on the mountain and the devil said, the world can be yours. You can have all of this if you just bow down and worship me. And most people took the gold, right? Blacks, whites, everybody just is, not supporting the group, individual advancement as opposed to group advancement.
That was an amazing answer. I learned so much from that. Thank you so much.
Actually was when you're speaking about the one thing I thought about too is this individualism, how here in the white supremacists always like push this idea of individualism, and I think that's because like they know like individual is easier than togetherness. So one of the things too that I was reading on page 106, not to jump too far ahead, but just like was reading is this idea of like the Egyptian people like transforming or changing into what they call like Caucasoids. And to me, I thought that was called Caucasian. So I'm not sure like what that meant, but it was just this idea of like literally Egyptians like transitioning to be white Asians, whether that's like their thought, speech, and behavior. And it's just one of those things of just like leaving everything behind, in order to take like this new identity. So this identity may mean like, let's not be together. Let's not support togetherness. Let's just work as individuals and see how far that gets us. But in reality, working individual is just going to be literally the gateway to destruction.
Yeah, I wanted to comment for my clarification. When they said Caucasoid features, I understood that to be, Caucasoid features, like how Africans have flatter noses, fuller lips, they start to, the curly hair, start to resemble more Caucasoid features. But you did bring up an interesting point. I didn't think about that, but, started to behave more like Caucasoids or Caucasians. Just wanted to add that part.
I feel like I've got my answer that in the ways in which I feel like they've cut for us as a stronghold. I would say the biological warfare, the keeping somebody at a state of survival. There was a beautiful story that one of my uncles had shared about Liberia being colonized by the Europeans. By American, and Sierra Leone was colonized by Britain. So one of the things that the benefits of colonizing a country after that conference that they managed to gain, each empire was importing and exporting in the country. And Liberia had got to a stage where they had understood that when the ports are taken back to America, there's payments that's received at the docks of taxes. So when they came over, the leaders started to talk and try and apply some form of organization and leadership, as anyone would do, to the Americans, and said, "Oh well, that we would want to charge a port fee because you have a port fee on your dock, so we want to have a port fee." Apparently, this was like so absurd, and like this is obviously a sign of leadership and organization taking place in the country. That the CIA had got involved and had corrupted one of the aspiring leaders that were in Liberia, and they had bad relations with a country called Aberdeen. I can't pronounce it. It's not Abuja because that's Nigeria. But it's after Guinea and after Guinea and up the provinces just above before Mali. I'm not sure.
Not Abidjan, Ivory Coast.
Abuja, thank you. That's the thank you so much. Yeah, that's the country, and Sierra Leone is in between it and Liberia. So once the CIA had orchestrated the whispering in the ear between Abuja and Liberia, a war kicked off between the two, and Sierra Leone was caught in the crossfire. My uncle was explaining this to me, being a Sierra Leonean, just to show me the levels of distraction that can be orchestrated to get a country to stop being organized and in that state of building up their economy through policies and showing leadership signs for their country. They'd rather create an internal conflict, and which sets us back about, I don't know, maybe 20 years. And maybe when we're ready to get back to the stage of where you are now, trying to create a standard of fees and exports to create money for your own economy. Yeah, it'll be 20 years from now. So that just showed them the white supremacist mentality on slowing down the development of African civilization. So I would say that that's one way in which the education of how the Asian had held their stronghold of the economy for cutting off Egypt from their trade. I would say that that's one way that they've continued to learn, perfect, and perpetuate and throughout time.
You know, you just brought to mind, Ghana just recently showed a glimpse of hope. And it showed an example. I just read an article yesterday about how Britain, you know, I guess during COVID or whatever, has been diverting Ghanaian passengers from Heathrow to, what is it, Gate, some other 50-mile away, second tier airport, Gathrop, starts with a G, some other airport other than. Yes. And so the Ghanaian government said, okay, you want to do us like that? We're not going to let you land in Accra. You got to land 100 miles down the road in the country.
Wow.
And so they lifted that, and they started letting Ghanaians land in Heathrow. And it's just we're at the very tip of retaking our power. Some things that are happening in South Africa, I mentioned before, how they're owning mines, and they have laws in place, policies in place that you saw that, right? The End of a Dream, the South Africa, The End of a Dream, the documentary.
No, but I need to see it.
You heard about it, huh? Where they have like a shanty town. You obviously know about shanty towns that, like in Soweto and all over Africa, in the ghettos, these little tin huts with dirt floors. They have a city like that, but it's all white in South Africa. So and there's some black mine owners too. So I like maybe by at the end of my life, and like when you guys are in your prime, I think you're going to get a glimpse of the beginning of Black power. And I don't want to call it Black supremacy, but that's really what it is. I mean, you know, uh, whoever built those pyramids and those sphinxes and those structures and brought math and science and morality to the world is superior. Whoever's more civilized, whoever's more humane, whoever promotes love and togetherness, to me, is more superior. So anyway, yeah, that's what I'm hopeful for. I see a glimpse of hope with what you just said, Mary.
I too. I hope that's true, Ben. I really do. Hopefully, we as a people don't keep making the same mistakes, and we actually do learn. I still feel that somewhat some of us are confused in large numbers all over the world. So we're going to continue making the same mistakes until, actually get it right. But I'd like to hope and believe, and I truly believe I'll be able to see, justice on the planet before I die.
And see, when we read about earlier in the book about how the systems of government that were in place, they were based on cooperation, not just with other human beings, but the animals, the trees, the earth, nature. That, the earth is the law. If you're in violation of the earth, which brings us life, and you're out of cooperation with the earth, you're out of it was this beautiful system of cooperation, and which is governed by nature. So here you have a people that are unnatural people. They're freaks of nature that have done everything in their power to oppose nature. And you can't oppose nature. You can't fight nature. You can slow, try to slow things down with this apartheid, but you're going away. you're going bye-bye. Bye-bye. You might as well go with the flow. Join the rest of the world in love and cooperation and unity. And they're going, oh, we don't want to go. We're gonna conquer nature. And so I think that whole concept right there is where they came up with this distorted symbol of God and the devil. It's like they're hiding the truth with this thing of God and the devil. The truth is nature and fighting the unnatural, fighting the natural. Fighting to stay white. Can you imagine? Fighting to stay white, to stay inferior. And turning Black. Oh man, this is so therapeutic. I feel so powerful from this group. I go to other groups and do other things for help, therapy. But this is the therapy. There's a term the Puerto Ricans, the Boricqueños have. It says la cultura is la cura. La cultura is la cura. The culture is the cure.
That is amazing. That's absolutely amazing. That's actually brought me to the earlier I'd asked the question, what is the biggest things that other races have learned from us? And I would say that from the destruction of Black civilization, they have learned to preserve their culture. 100% incorporate their culture into their media, incorporate their culture into their history. I'd say the Oriental Asian culture and Indian culture through Bollywood have done this the most. But the Asians, Indian Asian Indians or East Asians have done it, I'd say definitely through visual imagery the most, and film, and understanding that element, and the writings, the holding down of fighting styles, discipline, cultural, all those cultural values are highly in place. And I'd say it is from witnessing the destruction and complete degradation of and scattering of mentality, people, culture and structure. And although we still have a rich and vibrating culture today that still reach from, it's not organized in the way that it was before, that can bear reverence as the way that we you can the way the Chinese culture perform and restore and preserve for themselves right now, even through in museums. The respect that's given to our historical items, that like it's either not explained in the way that it should be, or we do not have ties to it in a way that we could even ask for it to be back in our country so we can display it. It's on display in the Western world. It's like as I don't know, like circus, like we're on show or circus, and it shows that the importance of cultural preservation, which I think is the greatest lesson we have taught every other culture, which they are now doing and holding to perfection. And also, I'd like to say, if anybody doesn't have any questions or notes for page 105 or 106, can we or should we move on to closing comments?
Before I forget, I just want to say the ultimate example of them learning that culture from Africa is the king, the royal family in England. Those people are going to keep those people lifted up as royalty, and because it's the representation of their culture. Where's our queen? Where's King Oba and Queen Edea? I have Queen Edea and King Oba on a bust. I have actually, this Nigerian told me I'm not supposed to actually have it. It's a Benin bust. It's nice size of Queen Edea. I bought it, and he said it may be a museum piece. It may be from the 40s or 50s. I paid a lot of money for it. And then you have King Oba on his horse with his shield and spear, indicating that, and this predated King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, with the armor, and the horse, in West Africa. Where's our king and queen? You have, and that, I don't want to go on. I don't want to belabor that. I'll talk all day about my disenchantment with the king and the queen. The king and the queen, the king of genocide, the king and queen of genocide, murder, theft, and crime, and corruption and decadence. So that'd be my closing comments, I guess.
Okay, so I'll move on to my closing comments. I would say, because I don't have any more notes written. I've learned so much from this discussion, and I'm really grateful for our meetings and ability to be able to articulate what we are reading and what we are learning about, and hearing so many different perspectives. I always feel as if I just leave enriched and richer for it, and so something that you can read and feel like triggered or traumatized with. I don't get that when we're discussing it in this manner. It allows me to constantly remind myself that what these authors are doing are laying in place a way for us to be able to critically analyze and think about it, so we can fast forward our evolution and solution building as we are on our journeys and doing our parts on our paths as well. So yeah, I'm really grateful for this chapter. I really enjoyed reading Ethiopia South and the Blackout. the blackout in review. I've really enjoyed it, and I'd say that the biggest takeaway for me in this. Let me see if I could. The biggest takeaway for me in this was the mentality of preservation of culture, the mentality of making sure to get to a stage of unification and thriving and having leadership and a mentality of spirituality and being guided by nature and spirituality, and how that will in that alone is unifying enough, because then you're on the same side as nature, then you're on the same side as the natural flow of things, which should hopefully help us align spiritually more faster together. So let's say I'm not saying like religion is an important aspect of mentality, but the way you live your life, which is what religion is supposed to be, your lifestyle will help determine a form of unity. So the closer we, even in an individual state, move towards oneness ourselves and that seeking of our higher selves, it would only put you on the path of nature. Therefore, on a level of at least a frequency of understanding, when you are coming together with people, that is easier to merge on cause. Yeah. So, and the power of removing that labeling from our social identity as a unifying factor, because if we solely rely on, oh, I'm black so I must do this, or I'm white so I can't do this, then we continue to play into the mechanisms of how social identity has been able to be manipulated and controlled through white supremacy, and understanding how they had, and the African civilizations had sub-houses of patrons for principles and goddesses that they were allegiance to, and each temple being aligned through principles will be more, I believe, more unifying for us, and as opposed to, like, I do believe in I'm gonna vote for everybody black, but really and truly what you're saying is I'm gonna vote for everybody who's in my struggle, or who's being hurt, and who's being hurt for this particular reason. So yeah, being aligned more in principle will definitely, I think, see us to a faster unification, and it's an easier way to convince people than trying to convince somebody they should do something because they're the same race. And I think that will help heal the tribalism issue that we are having uh, uh, problems with in Africa and all over the world, in fact.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. That's like the solution. You should run for president of Sierra Leone.
No. I've actually read in my star chart that I shouldn't do that. I'm liable to be killed. It
Wow.
literally said that.
Wow.
Don't do that.
Wow.
Wow. Very nice closing. I just like felt that I just like basically read the whole thing all over again, you know. I love that. One of the things too that I've taken away from what we read this week was just, man, so eye-opening. And I think it almost like is now I'm understanding the steps, or like really what happened, you know, because you kind of like when I reiterate like, oh, this is what happened to Black civilization before today. It's very like summary based. It's very like overall, and I think now it's giving me the words, or almost like a step-by-step guide of like how this destruction happened. And it wasn't just like an overnight thing, like boom, they came in and it destroyed everything. But I think it's just more of like how slow it happened, and how like each step was very important to this because it was very calculated. And I think like one of the things too is like realizing how calculated it is, and keep continuously asking the question of, so what can we do differently, you know? It's like, so this is happening and this is giving us the steps, but what can we do differently in order to not perpetuate this cycle over and over again? So it's just like nice to read it and really know. I didn't really know much about Ethiopia, so now it's like reading this, I get to know like who Ethiopia is, you know, like what country, like what happened in Ethiopia, and then what role did Egypt play in all of this as well. So like how this all merged together I mean, how these were all together in the beginning, and now they're starting to be separated by borders and everything. So it's just very interesting. I'm pretty interested to continue reading as well. Thank you.
Good. Excellent.
Yes, thank you, everyone. As always, thank you for allowing this discussion to happen. Enjoy and cherish all of your thoughts on this topic. The destruction of Black Civ. For me, this chapter and the reading so far just about getting a better understanding of how our great civilizations have fallen, and really understanding the mistakes and trying our best not to perpetuate them or repeat them. So it's great to hear you guys' thoughts and whether or not these things, whether we are repeating the same mistakes and coming up with solutions on how we can prevent them or change the course of history or the course of our future. So I look forward to another discussion, and thank you for the constructive conversation.
Thank you.
I like to highly, highly, highly recommend like this mind-blowing documentary I discovered last night called The Pyramid. I'll put it in the chat if you want me to. It's The Pyramid. Here it is.
Yeah, please do put it in the chat.
K 2019. Pyramid. It's on YouTube. And it's called Pyramid 2019. And as far as I'm concerned, it is by far the best explanation of how the pyramids were built. It's really technical. It's boring, actually. It has all, it's an architect class. It's architecture.
Is it the 4-hour video?
Huh?
It's 3.5 hours.
Are you looking at it? Is that what it says?
I mean, yeah, I typed in Pyramid 2019 K, or it says the movie Great Pyramid K 2019.
Yeah, that's the one. It's 3 hours.
Yeah, 3 hours and 37 minutes.
Wow, I didn't even watch. I don't even think I watched maybe half of it, maybe half of it, not quite half of it. You got to hang in there though, because it's gonna blow your mind once